Welcome to ChamberTalk, the podcast where we explore the stories and insights of leaders from various sectors who are making a difference in our community. I'm your host, Andrew Gregson, and today we have the pleasure of speaking to Mark Lee, the Chief Executive Officer of Radiant Futures. Welcome on the show today, Mark.
Oh, so great to be here.
So, Mark, we're going to start off with an easy question for you. I did look up on LinkedIn the other day, and you're celebrating like your 12th year at Radiant Futures, isn't it? You're coming up.
10 years, actually.
10 years. All right. Okay.
Almost.
That's amazing. Well done.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Thank you very much. So, you have a diverse, impressive background in non-profit management, and you've worked for quite a few companies over the years. Do you mind sharing with listeners what inspired you to pursue a career in non-profit?
Great question. It's something that I haven't really thought about in a while, but I went to school at UC Irvine, and I studied history, and I thought I was going to be a fantastic history professor or teacher, make history exciting again. So that was my path, what I thought. But at the same time at school, I was involved with a community service fraternity called Alpha Phi Omega, and we did a lot of community services work. And during that time, I got introduced to a lot of Orange County-based nonprofits and learned that they do so much positive impact in the community, but these people are not just volunteers. These are working professionals as a career. So that really opened my eyes that I could really have a career in nonprofits. So right after graduation, I applied and I did a lot of the direct services work in the affordable housing communities. And then fast forward to today, now I'm running a nonprofit here in Fullerton.
Well, I think you just gave us a little bit of a leading question there, because you said, you were thinking about being a history teacher. And I do know that Radiant Futures has got quite a long history. Do you mind sharing like a quick snapshot about Radiant Futures, or what was it before it was Women's Transitional Living Center, right?
Right. So we're formerly known as WTLC, or Women's Transitional Living Center, as you said. But we're the oldest domestic violence service provider in Orange County and the third oldest in the United States. We were founded back in 1976. And throughout the decades, we really evolved to meet the changing needs of survivors in our communities. And now we're one of the biggest, largest, and most comprehensive service provider for survivors of both domestic violence and human trafficking.
And you're mentioning before domestic violence and human trafficking. How does that come about? Like, is it people are reaching out to you? How does it all work?
Every survivor's path to us is very different. There isn't a one size or one path for all. So we do have some that would just Google domestic violence shelter, and if our name pops up, they'll call our 24/7 helpline number. We do get quite a few escorts by law enforcement, so either directly from the ER emergency room, and then they're being transported by law enforcement to our shelter program. And we also get a lot of referrals from other community nonprofits where they are not providing services for survivors of domestic violence, but they become aware that their clients are going through a domestic violence situation, so then they would make a referral to us, Radiant Futures.
And, I'm assuming you have to have various standards or programs or procedures and things. You want to walk us through a little bit about these? Because it's not just a case of you just put a roof over someone's head, is it?
No, number one issue that we always try to address is safety, right? So if someone is fleeing from a domestic violence situation, we assess for their safety. We do a safety plan, and we just do whatever we can to protect their safety. After that, we could then start working on recovering from their trauma and abuse, and that could look very different to each individual, but that involves a lot of counseling services and legal support. So we do whatever we can. We have the survivors actually tell us how we could help them to recover from their abuse, as opposed to us telling them you need to do X, Y, Z.
Right, because not everybody fits in the same box today.
Exactly. And, interestingly enough, Andrew, for the longest time, the domestic violence agencies really did operate from what I like to say an old school model, where it was more like that one size fits model.
Right.
And everyone, including us, we had a program where everyone just had to wake up by a certain time. Everyone had to have breakfast by a certain time. Everyone's schedule and attending classes and counseling had to be like, it has to look like this. Everyone had a curfew. But we as an agency realized that in order for us to be trauma informed, we shouldn't follow that old school model. And, it's one thought is that, if we are controlling the survivors' lives in our programs, what makes us different from that partner who is abusing and controlling that person, right? So we really wanted to give a sense of agency, a sense of control and power back onto the survivor, where they get to decide how they want to participate in our program.
I think I'm going to ask you a question in a moment about nonprofit change, because I believe that you have to change too. So we'll circle back to that, but that's very interesting. What is quite amazing, especially these days, you need so many different types of qualified staff, and loads of folks are struggling finding the right people. How's it working for you guys?
Just thinking back at trends, I think we experience very similar situations with a lot of other businesses right after COVID, with that massive, not layoffs, but resignations.
Sure.
The motivation for people wanting to continue to work wasn't as high. So we did struggle with a lot of turnover right after COVID. But fast forward to today, our employee retention rate is at 97%
that's
average
good.
throughout the year.
Good.
And I think one thing that we as an agency really think about is recognizing that our staff are in a very challenging and difficult situation because they have to be well enough, strong enough themselves in order to help survivors who are going through something very traumatic, right? So we try to give to our staff as much self-care opportunities or other kind of fun activities, or even increasing our benefits and rewards for our employees, for them to feel like they're being appreciated so that they are being recharged and feeling happy about their workplace so that they could provide quality services to our survivors.
God, I bet at times some people might need some type of counseling themselves after hearing some of these stories, do they?
Yeah, so that term is called vicarious trauma. So a lot of times our staff, when they are helping the survivor's trauma gets transferred on back to the staff member.
Wow.
And they need a moment to decompress, debrief. Andrew, I think it's been a while since you came to our Fullerton office, but we do have something what we call a sensory room. And our sensory room, we have all these high-tech, really expensive, really cool-looking equipment. But the purpose of the sensory room is to really engage in using all your senses to help you decompress your stressful situation.
Oh, wow.
Normally, sensory rooms have been used with kids on the autism spectrum. But what we found is for our survivors who are receiving their counseling services, this was traditional talk therapy. Naturally, when you're talking to your counselor about your abuse, you're getting re-triggered, right?
Sure.
So how do we expect the survivor to go back to work right after a counseling session if they're being re-triggered? So we do have them spend time in our sensory room where they get to touch different things. They get to see all these LED lights that really triggers their senses. So it really does help them decompress on a physiology level.
Wow.
So it's pretty cool. But what's also cool, why I'm bringing this up, is that our staff have also been using the sensory room
Makes
for
sense.
them to decompress between meetings with survivors.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. I need to go down there.
Yeah, you do. I'm sure.
So, Mark, I get asked this question a lot, and I would love for you to answer it. But why did you change the name from Women's Transitional Living Centre to Radiant Futures?
With the name, I just want to say first that WTLC, or Women's Transitional Living Center, always has a special place in my heart because it really speaks to a time in history where the women's movement really brought up domestic violence as an issue where people talked about and started to change people's ideas of what domestic violence is, right? But fast forward to today's time, it didn't really represent who we are as an organization. So one example, we serve men who've been abused by their partner. So having the name Women's Transitional Living Center, you might not think to come to our program assuming that we don't provide services to men, right? So that's one reason. The other aspect of the name that is a factor that didn't really represent who we are as an organization is that when we first were founded back in 1976, we just operated a shelter program. So that spoke to the Transitional Living Center. But today, we do have our housing program, but we do so much more. We do our counseling services, we do our legal services, we do community and outreach programs. We'll go out to schools and teach kids about healthy relationships. So all of that just didn't really speak to who we are as an organization because we do so much more.
Right.
And one great thing about our new name now is that it's actually derived from a lot of different adjectives that our survivors use in a focus group session for them to describe their experience in our program. So we really wanted to use their voice and their words in formulating our new brand identity.
That's really clever.
Yeah.
That's smart. Good job. That's awesome. So, Mark, I remember when you did your open day for that new building that you'd had built, I remember reading and somebody had mentioned something about how you were one of the first actual shelters here in the US. Prior, people were staying at people's homes and things.
Yeah, so yes, we were the first shelter in Orange County to be available for survivors of domestic violence, but it's because at that time people had no choice but to either stay at home or take their baby and sleep in the car overnight, wait for things to cool down a little bit, and then go back home. So that was happening frequently back in the 70s, where you see a lot of moms with young babies and children just sleeping in the cars.
You were saying you have lots of different programs. What are the more newer programs or approaches that you've been taking recently?
Yeah, so we're just talking about shelter, and emergency shelter is really important because it provides an immediate safety place for someone to be able to flee from and come and stay at a safe place, right? But sometimes just being in a shelter for just short term is not long enough, right? So our housing program, we now call Bridge Housing, is really comprehensive. So yes, we do have a shelter, but we also have a transitional housing program. And Andrew, if you remember the ribbon cutting, that was the home that we built because a lot of our families and individuals who've been in a really, really, really just traumatic situation just needs a longer time with us, and they need a longer term stay. So in our transitional housing program, they could stay with us for up to 24 months. They don't have to pay rent, but they're just staying with us, and they will continue to receive our programs. We even take a step further. Our key housing program is for anyone who's wanting and is ready to have their own apartment, but they may not have their initial money for the deposits or rent. We'll pay for everything for up to 12 months.
Wow.
And during that 12 months, they'll work with our staff to help them find employment. So by the end of the year, they'll be able to be financially independent so that they could, sustain the rent and other living costs. But that's our housing program. It started from just a short-term shelter to a whole gambit of housing resources, right?
Well, I remember listening, one of your doctors had come over to Rotary and they were actually talking about how they'd helped somebody get a driving license. In fact, the whole, to get you back on your feet, so to speak, right?
We have to be that one-stop stop for a lot of our survivors because, we have them identify their individual goals, right? What do they need to have in order for them to achieve their goal? And there's a lot of in-between steps. So one step would be, I don't have my driver license. My partner never allowed me to get a driver license.
Right.
Or I don't have my passport because my partner hid all the documents away from me, right?
Sure.
So we do work with the survivors, and really whatever their needs are, we really help them. Exactly.
So this costs a lot. So, let's talk about that. I know for years you've been an expert fund grant writer, I believe. I'm assuming that's why you ended up where you are. So what's happening with that? I mean, I know the government's cutting back on some grants for nonprofits and things. So where does all the money come from?
Yeah, so majority of our revenue does come from government contracts from the federal level. And, not to make a long story longer, most people assume that our government contract comes from taxpayer money, but it actually doesn't.
Right.
It comes from something called VOCA funds, which are restitution of funds that's been collected that's been charged on the federal level. So these criminals on the federal level have to pay restitution. That funds this bucket, and the bucket then gets dispersed to different states throughout the nation. So that's how we get funded. That's how we get funded, but that's not enough.
Sure.
And if you could imagine government contracts, there's a lot of restrictions
Sure.
and allowable expenses, what's not allowed. But our philosophy is to provide individualized care. So how do we take a contract that is very created by like this, one size fits model type of structure,
Sure.
but still provide that flexibility and individualized care? So we have to supplement our government contracts with private foundation funds or fundraising events so that we can provide that individualized care. For example, something as silly as someone needing a black sole shoes for their new job.
Right.
Maybe our contracts don't allow for us to provide
Purchase
that for the
that type of
survivors.
stuff, right?
So how do
right.
we get that? We ask for donations from our community so that we could get the funds to give them a Walmart gift card so they could get their own closed-toe black-soled shoes for their jobs.
Right. And when you say your community, that's a good point. Your community meaning Orange County because you're serving Orange County? We're not talking community just Fullertonians, right?
Yes, all of Orange County, but in fact, some of our clients come from out of state.
I'm sure.
We even have some clients coming from Guatemala too.
Wow.
So we provide services to anybody. So we're not geographically restricted.
Sure.
In fact, just recently, we had someone call us from Texas. They were being abused by their partner, but they didn't want to stay in Texas because they really feared for their safety.
Right.
And they had some distant relatives in Southern California, so they were looking for a program in Orange County area, wondering if we could help them. And we say, of course. Do you have transportation? They don't have transportation. We pay for their plane ticket, and we flew them here, and then they stayed in our shelter program, and we were able to help her out.
So if anybody's listening out there and they're wanting to help, they can contact Radiant Futures, and you'd be more than happy to put those funds where they really need it.
Exactly. We don't want to say no to anybody because it's already so hard to pick up the phone call in the first place for many of our survivors. And then for them to hear no, just really would be so defeating for them, right?
Sure.
We'll do our best. We don't even worry about funding. We worry about that later.
Later, of course.
But we just bring them into our program.
Right, that's amazing. So you were mentioning before, and I said we'll circle back to it because it's fitting in right now. A lot of non-profits, they're having to look at where they can fit other areas into their programs to help them continue to survive. So to give you an example, we do a lot more services than maybe the Chamber did before because that's going to help us bring in more money some way. What are you having to do? Are you having to change the way your organization usually operates because of all this?
Yeah, so we've been having strategic plans, and we're on our second one already since I came on board in this position as a CEO. So we're on our second. So the strategic plan really identifies a roadmap for our organization with the number one priority thinking about sustainability. Like, how do we survive as an organization for the long term? And we need to do XYZ in today's time to set up that foundation so that we could be sustainable and survive throughout the years, right? So one area is, things like doing a name change. Even though it might sound so silly now, but the whole reason why we even went through this 2.5 long process to do a new brand identity is thinking about the future for the organization, right? Increasing our footprint physical. So we just expanded out to Anaheim. So we have this really great 8,000 square feet space where we do programs because no other domestic violence agency actually is physically present in Anaheim.
Right.
So that was one of our strategic areas that we wanted to have a physical presence in, right? So just increasing our footprint and just continuing on with our quality of work so that our funders and our community would see Radiant Futures, know that we do good work, know that there's, we have a good reputation for doing good in the community. And then we would then rely on our community to help us sustain and survive for the future.
Makes total sense. And I remember when you first changed your name, I remember seeing billboards off the freeway as you were driving down towards Irvine.
I got so many texts from folks
I
sending me pictures.
Yeah, I used to take pictures, send it to Susie because she was on the board at the time.
Yeah.
So that was a good point you just brought up there, which it brings us into something that the Chamber loves a lot is collaboration. So you're doing all these different programs and things. Do you collaborate, or are you collaborating with folks like Cal State Fullerton or Chapman, or how's that going for you?
We can't do it all, right? And we were a really strong believer in the phrase, it really takes a village to make the needle move in a positive direction, right? Mm-hmm. So with Cal State Fullerton, we partner with their MSW program. So grad students who are wanting to become therapists or social workers, they do their field internship with us. Oh. So that helps us increase our capacity. So
sure.
Even though we have 4 licensed therapists on site full time, having these MSW interns, we're allowed to see more clients without having added people in our payroll. So we do partner with Cal State Fullerton that way. Yes.
All right, that's okay. That's good. Is there anyone else out there who you would like to maybe start collaborating with that helps you? Because I know you sit back there and you go, well, if who else is out there?
So housing. Although our housing program is really comprehensive, one thing that we're identifying here in Orange County is the availability of affordable units.
We mean real affordable, not affordable, the chart affordable. Real affordable. Units, right.
So even though we have funds and the means to pay for rent and security deposit for up to a year, but if that unit is not within the affordability range to begin with,
right, it's out of touch.
Right, it's out of touch. I think that's one big issue. So we would love to partner with affordable housing developers or other kind of housing authorities across the county where they will prioritize on building affordable housing units just for survivors of domestic violence. Because not that this is wrong, but a lot of the focus has been on the homelessness population, which of course they need access to affordable housing, definitely.
Sure.
But I just need to be that voice and say, hey, also think about survivors of domestic violence, because if they don't have their own housing, it's so easy for them to go back to their abuser, and then they'll have to go through the abuse another cycle, right? So I think just kind of really realizing that there also needs to be some priority or effort to make housing accessible for survivors of domestic violence.
Well, I think, I hear it an awful lot, and I'm sure you do as well in your line of work, but we hear a lot about how even politicians will jump on this, we're on this affordable housing bill, excuse me. And we both know, well, we're talking affordable $120,000 a year job here in Orange County. You're talking about that level. But when you and I are sat here talking about affordable, we're talking about $1,700 rent affordable, not $3,000 or $4,000. And I think without us actually having these conversations and sharing it with the public, how would the public ever know? Because you and I, we're sat in these different meetings and we know, it's almost like internally we're rolling our eyes thinking, that's not really affordable. However, I think the general public probably don't realize, because the term is so broad, that what needs to be done. So I think it's good that you share that and that we actually mention these things, because even folks who own properties, if they have loads of different apartments or whatever, and they're looking for that, I think that would be a great way of helping or working together as a community.
Right. And I think a solution that I like to recommend to really honor the word affordable is not looking at a fixed amount, right? So even when you said $1,700, yes, that is affordable. But to a lot of our survivors, that's still not affordable,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
If it's like a percentage of their income, like no more than 30% of what that survivor is making, you would charge for rent would be a beautiful solution. But again, we would love to partner with any housing developers or housing authorities that could make that happen.
That should be something that we actually lobby for and ask if our Congress or Assembly or even senators start looking at a bill. Because if you think about it, that would be real help, wouldn't it? Is if you took somebody's percentage of what they earn and then the rest could be helped or subsidized to afford it, then landlords wouldn't be reluctant to rent their properties out. Right. Everybody would get paid, but then we're really helping those people. Because something you mentioned before was folks who are actually living in the cars. I remember when they were talking about Anaheim, and some of the people who are working down there, is some of them are actually just living out of the cars and then going to work. And it sort of fits in the same, area, doesn't it? It's not just the one. Keeping this going a little bit, and so it's not too boring for everybody who's listening, I heard you're a bit of a foodie, Mark. You want to share a bit about that?
Oh my gosh, how'd you know?
Oh, because we have our fingers everywhere with the chamber.
Well, okay, so when my husband and I are not working, we actually go out to different restaurants and we eat their food and we actually film ourselves. So we're kind of big on Instagram right now.
Well, so good for you. All right, what's your Instagram handle there?
It's actually my husband's full name, so James Van Lay, and but we film it together, and it's so much fun to have this common hobby with him because we don't do it. This is not our full-time gig, obviously, but something that we already like doing is to go out, explore different restaurants, try out new foods, but also filming ourselves and letting other people know about this restaurant has been a really fun hobby. And
have you come across some really terrible ones where you were you almost had to leave, or?
Yes, and I wouldn't want to name them.
No, I'm not looking for you to name them. No, I wasn't. I was just wanting to hear some stories.
Yeah. So there are some interesting ones, right? Where maybe even though they knew that we were coming to film, the service or the food wasn't that great.
So do you usually warn people?
Yes.
Oh, that's nice of you.
Right. So we do.
You do it the right way.
But sometimes we don't.
Oh,
and
okay.
But a lot of times now, because we have a following, that a lot of the restaurants who are wanting to market themselves would actually
reach out to
us and ask us and invite us.
Oh, good.
But we got to learn so many new restaurants too. Not to do a plug, but they're in Fullerton. Akashiro here in downtown Fullerton.
Okay.
Really, really great Peruvian sushi. So I don't know if you had that before, but it's a unique take on sushi.
Oh, that's good. And will you travel a fair distance to do this, or you try and keep it local?
Maybe 90% of our content is Orange County based restaurants, but we do go out to Walnut or K-Town in LA. So yeah, we kind of a little bit in LA County, but majority is in Orange County.
Oh, good for you. Well, next, if we see you out there, we'll know what's going on next time.
If you need any food recommendations, I
think that's good. That's awesome. That's cool. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. If you're a restaurateur or restaurantee and you see Mark and his husband out and about, make sure you give good service. Otherwise, you're going to end up on Instagram there. That's cool, though. That's cool. I like the fact that you reach out to people, too. That's pretty fair. Because most people, they're always trying to catch folks out, aren't they?
No, we do say, hey, we'd love to come and film. Are you okay? And then...
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I'll have to look that up now. I'm really interested. So anyway, let's go back into Radiant Futures, because that's why you're here. And by the way, thank you very much for your membership. You guys have been members for a long time, and we really do appreciate it. Helps us stay alive and keep the doors open, I can tell you that. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So over the years, you were mentioning before, you've got, you've helped people in loads of different ways. You must have one or two particular highlights that have touched you over the years you've worked there. You mind sharing one or two of those?
Yes, there's one that comes to my mind very clearly. It was actually my second or third year working at the organization. I was the COO at that time, so I wasn't really doing any programs.
Sure.
but we did have someone come to us through an escort from Fullerton PD, and she just came from St. Jude's emergency room. When she came to us, she had a huge black eye, 2 broken ribs, really bruised up body. But I got involved because at that time the staff really needed a Korean-speaking individual at the organization to do the intake. And at that time, I was the only Korean person at the organization. So I did the intake, and it really, really, really got emotional for both of us. But mainly it's because she kept saying that it was her fault. Ugh. If she didn't say this, then I wouldn't have provoked this attack on me. So she kept blaming the abuse on herself. And then for me, validating her feelings, but at the same time letting her know no one deserves to be physically hurt like this. That was something that we had to go through together. But after the 3rd day in our shelter, she decided to go back to her partner, and she's still kind of blaming herself for the abuse. And that really kind of made it difficult for me to see that as the outcome.
Of course.
But what I hope, though, so I'm still very hopeful, is that my short encounter with her, my hope is that I planted some seed in her mind that the abuse is never her fault. So if it does happen again, hopefully it didn't, but if it did, she's now saying it's not my fault. I don't deserve this. So I hope that I had that kind of effect on her.
In fact, that's a really heartwarming story. And back then you didn't have that special room, so you probably took it all on. So that's pretty cool. I mean, that's hard to deal with. Out of interest, though, and if you don't mind me asking, because that threw a point out, does there seem to be a difference the way people who come into your world act differently because they're from different cultures? Is that a big difference?
A huge difference. So one example, looking at the population demographic in Orange County, almost 30% is Asian Americans here in Orange County. If you look at our data, we're only serving 2% of our whole clients served in a year are Asian Americans.
Really?
There's some huge disconnect with the Asian American community in Orange County and how they view and understand domestic violence, and then the available resources. So there's some disconnect there, right?
So the disconnect there could also be proud nation, could be the fact not really knowing shame, not seeing it.
Not to break up the family. We did have another, there were a Chinese American mom with 2 kids from Irvine that came to our program. The kids kept saying, "Mom, why am I here? I want to go back to home and go back to school. Like, what's going on?" And the mom tried so hard to be like, no, this is okay. But she ultimately decided to go back home with the kids because of the pressure from the kids, wanting to provide that normalcy back to them, right? So the sense of family is really strong. It's strong across all cultures.
Of course. Just people are different.
Different level of understanding of family, what family is, right? And just a lot of shame within the Asian American community to kind of break free. One example that I became familiar with is, because I'm Korean American, I'm a little bit more familiar. There's a lot of Korean Americans here that go to church. And when they are going through maybe a domestic violence situation, perhaps they would confide in their pastor, or
that happens a lot, doesn't it? Yeah.
Or some religious leader of that church, right? And if that pastor is not trained or understand the resources available, how are they going to help that survivor to our program like ours?
Yeah,
right?
They're missing the tools, aren't they?
They might be missing the tools, or they might just say, "Let's just pray together."
Sure.
And then everything will be okay, which is great. Spiritual strength is really important, but that's not the only resource available. So I think we still have a lot of work to do to reach out to these really, targeted communities in Orange County, such as the Asian Americans, such as LGBT community, these other underserved communities, and do a lot of more outreach and let them know that resources like us are available for survivors.
So, there's no easy fix here, is there? And, you've been in this job for quite a number of years, so your experience in it is very vast. If somebody were listening, and they were thinking about, they wanted to reach out, and they have all these worries and concerns about that, what is that comfort sort of sentence or paragraphs you would like to explain to somebody to somehow, level that fear down a little bit that you don't often get to share with someone?
We always let the survivors, especially if they're calling our helpline, know that we're always here for them, but then they get to decide how we help them. And we find that to be very helpful to the survivor, because a lot of times, if you kind of come out strong and say, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, they might just be, wow, that's overwhelming for me, right? So we really try to match the pace with the level that the survivor is wanting, and we kind of do an assessment on that. A lot of the callers to our helpline, a lot of them are not ready to leave. They're not ready to flee, but they just need that emotional support, right? So they'll be on the phone with our staff answering, just talking about relationships and talking about this and that, and just giving them emotional support just for them to handle that day, and they'll hang up. And maybe next week they'll call again and wanting that same emotional support, because for whatever reason, for that moment, that survivor that's their respite, right? That's their break from their situation.
Sure.
And then when they're ready, they'll feel that confidence and trust with us, and they'll make that phone call again and say, I'm ready to leave. Can you help me? Wow.
And then on that point, how do you sort of, this is going to sound the wrong way, but how do you measure your program's success and metrics? How do you do that as a CEO?
Yeah, so we do have our evaluation plan. What makes it difficult is, as I mentioned earlier, our program is really centered around the survivor's need.
Right.
So every need could look different, right? So how do you create an evaluation plan that is standardized, but your program structure,
to help out,
your program structure and your framework is really survivor driven and very individualized care. So what our solution to that is, well, we try not to identify each individualized care, but just have the survivors reach their identified goals. So keeping the wording broad, and then it doesn't matter if the survivor's goal is something as simple as just getting their passport renewed, or something more difficult as securing housing, right? We just count that, if they're able to reach that goal, then that's a plus. If they weren't, then we don't include that in our evaluation success rate.
And then over time, is that how you will decipher whether a program requires a little bit more? Well, I suppose people are telling you, right? Like if they're saying, well, it's not working for me, is that how you move with the times, is it?
Yeah.
Right.
So again, the survivor direct us how we could help them, and their plan could change midway. It could change multiple times. Their identified goals could change, and we say that's fine. You could change your goals, we really adapt to their needs.
Right. So on that point, how many staff do you have? Because that's a lot of changes that people can have, isn't it?
We have 52 full-time staff.
Wow.
So, and then when I first started,
there's like 4 of you or something.
it was like maybe 12 of us.
yeah.
And now there's more than 50 of us. So we've really grown our staff capacity over the years.
That's amazing, isn't it? And do you also help folks if they're trying to get into a job? Like they might need to write a resume, they might need to find out what they want to do. Is it like a career thing? You have that going on too?
We have a career thing. We have a specific program called Life Skills. So things like nutrition or hygiene. Because again, we understand that a lot of survivors may, recovery from abuse is number one priority. Safety is number one priority. But since they're already in our program, are there other aspects of their life that they want to improve that we're able to help them with, right? We think about everything. don't just focus on the high priorities. We just think about the whole person.
Of course. No, it makes total sense because you've got to round it off, haven't you? And that's how I would think about it, is that, from beginning, making those first steps on the telephone, maybe helping somebody out of the area they're in, the situation, putting them into a home, then helping them out, then all the rest of it. But eventually you want to help them grow. And the next part of growth would be being able to be on your own,
Right.
find somewhere, find work, and I know I get it. It's a lot. Well, we've got some programs that are coming up, so maybe we can work together on that, because we want to help people stay in work, and we've also realised a lot of people are missing those skills that most employers are looking for because they don't even do it. Even out of school, they're not simple things like Excel or Microsoft Word or doing things like communication or stuff like that. So we're trying to put that together as well. So maybe that'll be something that we might end up working together, because the whole idea would be, if somebody comes on this sort of like 6-week training sort of programming, is you'd end up leaving having a full resume because you built it in Word, you created your own PowerPoint, so you have a presentation so you can present yourself to someone. That's the whole mental idea behind it anyway.
That's fantastic. Learning those soft skills that's so important in the workplace would set up a lot of our survivors up for success in the workforce, right? So
well, offline we'll talk about that further on. So another thing that makes me wonder about this is, obviously, there's a big part to, and you mentioned before about the staff and the 50 odd staff that you've got now. Finding that dedicated person to do that. How do you go about finding folks? Or do they literally like calling in and saying, "Hey, I'd love to help"?
So we're a little bit unique where the state has a mandate. The state has a law that requires anyone working or volunteering at a state-recognized domestic violence agency needs to have a 40-hour training certificate. And so a lot of the folks that just call and say, "I want to volunteer, I want to help survivors, I really want to help," we say, well, if you want to do like administrative volunteer, we could have you start right away. But if you want to interact with survivors directly, you have to go through this 40-hour training, which we do facilitate throughout the year. But there are other agencies that do as well. But that could be maybe a barrier to a lot of folks who want to help and come to our doors to help.
And so, what are some of the major challenges you face right now that we could talk about? Maybe people might be able to help out there.
Well, one challenge that is actually an opportunity, I view it as an opportunity, is that for the past few years, we actually open our doors and providing services to the abusers or people that cause harm. And when I first told people about that out in the community, they're like, what the heck? But, if our vision is to really end the cycle of violence, why are we ignoring half of the population who's involved in domestic violence?
Right.
And because they're going to be in a new relationship, and they're going to repeat their abuse to their new partner, right? So we're going to see the cycle repeat itself over and over again. So if we're not helping the people that are causing the harm, then we're not going to see the end to that cycle.
Repeat offenders, haven't you?
Exactly.
Again? Right.
And if you really think about it, there is a study that does say that majority of those people that do cause harm are victims of abuse themselves early in their life. They just don't know how to cope with their trauma, so they take it out in a very toxic and negative way. So in that sense, why are we not helping these once victims, right? So we're not condoning their behavior right now, but we want to end that behavior right now. So we do a lot of counseling services for those that do cause harm. We do anger management classes.
Wow.
We do this voluntary program just for men, for them to understand what healthy masculinity is. And we're this year starting this fatherhood program where we're providing opportunities for dads and their kids to go to the Angels game, to do laser tag, just more fun, like family events just for the father and the child, so that with that we hope that the child will grow up healthier, understanding that, oh, my father was a positive influence in my life, right? So So it was a challenge at first because when I talked to our funders, when I talked to our donors, the reaction was like, "What? I don't want to."
Well, it's far the bigger picture what you're looking at there, though, isn't it?
But in the beginning, it took a lot of people a second to realize, oh, you know what? Maybe what Radiant Futures is doing is great. But initially, they're like, why is my dollar funding the bad guy, right? So, but in today's time, we are not fully funded for this initiative.
Sure.
But slowly, we're seeing a little bit more and more.
That's good.
Yeah.
That is good. You were mentioning a little bit earlier that this isn't just for women of domestic violence. It's also for men and for folks who are in the LGBTQIA communities. Dealing with different types of communities there, does the way you have to approach or help people differ? Because I know for a fact men are going to be very different than maybe women when they approach you.
You're right. We do approach people differently. And again, this goes back to our individualized care, right? So for those who are in the LGBTQIA community, first we need to make sure that they feel like they're in a safe place where they could be themselves. So our staff, there's a training called Safe Zone. So as an organization and as a facility, we are Safe Zone certified. And that also includes staff's training and understanding of being inclusive with the LGBTQI community. But not only that, we have men who are in, hetero, relationships. So their wives are beating the husband.
Yeah,
up.
and they're going to be less likely to.
There's a lot of shame to that. So our staff really have to adapt and make sure that they're not unintentionally, but making it a little bit more embarrassing, with that male survivor. But we do have men both from the LGBTQI, from heterosexual relationships come into our program. One story, we actually had this guy come in, and if you look at him physically, like he just looks really buff, just like really, really.
There's no way he got bullied.
It doesn't look that way, and a lot of the women in the shelter program initially was like, "Why is he doing here? Like, I'm getting triggered, like
of course.
He looks like my abusive partner." And it took us a second to make sure that all the clients in our program felt comfortable. But the bottom line is that this person, just like you, need shelter and need a safe place. And since then, what we saw happening organically is that because this guy came with their 1-year-old daughter.
Wow.
And he did not know how to change the diaper. So all these other moms in our program was teaching him how to hold the baby, how to change the diaper, how to hold the bottle up. So we saw this camaraderie and this friendship being built because they have that common, goal of wanting to recover from their trauma.
Wow, that's pretty cool. That's a cool story.
Yeah.
That is. Now, something I know that your organization, wasn't it one of the first to allow you to bring your pet with you because they were worried that folks wouldn't leave because they loved their little dog or cat?
We're the first and only one still in Orange County. Wow. So we definitely want the other domestic violence agencies to consider, because, it's a great thing to accept pets. And I don't know how you feel, but for me, when I had my dog, he was definitely part of the family.
Sure.
And again, our philosophy is not to make it harder, not to add more barriers to our programs. So when someone calls and say they have their dog and, before when we said, oh, we're not pet friendly, why are we doing that to that survivor? Why are we making it more difficult? So we became pet friendly, and since then it's been fantastic.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, that's good forward thinking, that though. That really is.
Yeah.
So as we're drawing to a close, I'm going to ask you in a minute if you wanted to share anything. But one of the bigger things is because you've been in this field for a very long time. If somebody was thinking of even just getting into the non-profit world, what advice would you share that person today?
This is a great career choice because it really does allow you to fulfill your passion, your compassion in humanity, your love for community change, but also make this into a career. So it's not just volunteerism, right? So this is actually your full-time job. I'm so blessed that I have this as my career choice, where I get to fulfill that kind of personal need of wanting to do good for the community, but also, I need to survive myself as an individual.
Sure.
And I want, and there's a lot of misconceptions that I hear even today about nonprofit work. I still get questions about, Mark, how do you get paid? Do you get paid? You know,
Right, yeah,
so
of
little
course.
things like that. But you know, I think there are opportunities for someone to have a lifelong career in the nonprofit field. And what great choice to be in a situation where you're helping others and also kind of help, you know, and making this your job.
It's a huge chunk of our lives, I think, when you see, I mean, yes, we help people differently, obviously, but when you see that somebody who you were able to reach out or help, or you touched in some way or did anything else, and then you see them flourish on the other end, it's such an amount of like, oh my God, I'm so happy. You know, I'm so happy I was a part of that.
And no amount of salary or benefits could really give you that fulfillment.
It can't. I mean, the salary helps because you got to pay for your own mortgage and stuff. But you're right. It's a far bigger gift, isn't it? Really, and it keeps you going on. All those days that are like you struggle or are difficult, it makes you get through those days to get to the lighter days.
Yeah.
I can definitely, for a long time, I don't think my wife understood why I was doing this job, but she gets it now. She understands that it is. It's a lot. It's a lot to do with helping people. And I think one thing that nearly everybody who I meet in the nonprofit world, we all share that together, is the greater gift of giving. It's not just that, you know, you 9 to 5, see you later, because we live with it all the time.
Yeah,
it's in our minds all the time, aren't we? We're always trying to think.
Yeah, and you know, just to add to that point, Andrew, nonprofit, we exist because it's something that the government or the for-profit can't fulfill in our society.
Right, that's true.
So we are really fulfilling the needs of our community because, you know, it's something that the government or the for-profit businesses can't do, and that's a really special place to, you know.
It really is, and it's getting larger because
Yeah.
the more that we're all worried about this thing, the more this other area, this grey area out there that's just not been seen to, isn't it?
Right.
So as we're coming to a close, we always ask our guests if there's one thing they would like to share. Now, you know, when I was in the army, it would be a, oh, hello, mum moment, right? Or maybe for you, it might be something about something else. But what would you like to share in closing, that, like, your final message per se, that we haven't actually touched on?
Well, I wouldn't do my job right if I don't plug in our next fundraising event.
Good idea.
So in October 24th is our Dueling Pianos. It's a really fun, cozy, intimate event that we host every year. It's great music, really good food and drinks. And if you have a voice, even if you don't have a voice, you are welcome to come up on stage and sing in front of your friends. But it's a really fantastic night. But we do this event in October because it's the Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So not only it is a fundraising event, but we host this event so that our community could like learn more about domestic violence and just kind of keep that in their minds, so that if they are in a situation or they know someone in a situation, they'll be able to help them out.
And you host this at the Mockentheller or in your backyard, or
at our Fullerton campus backyard.
Wow,
yeah, we deck out the whole
cool.
backyard.
Wow, that's cool. And you said you had 2 pianists come, and then people could just come up and start karaokeing away, can they?
They could start karaokeing, or they could request songs. The musicians are so talented.
Right.
Whatever song, you know, they could do some classic, you know, Beatles songs, or they could do Cardi B. They have a wide range.
That's
of
cool. That's cool.
ability.
And then people can find this on your website?
Yes.
All right. And your website is, Mark?
RadiantFutures.org.
There you go, RadiantFutures.org. Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure having you on here today. I've actually learnt a lot more today, as we always do anyway, so thank you so very much for coming on today.
Oh, I had so much fun. Thank you for having me.
So thank you again, Mark, for joining us, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in to Chamber Talk. Until next time, stay inspired and stay connected by visiting nocchamber.com or selecting sign up for e-news at the top of the page. For more interviews, visit chambertalk.podbean.com.